Hi, this is Mr. Wartsky, and today we are going to start our trip through the endocrine system. If you have any questions, please refer to your textbook, watch the video over again, or ask me in class tomorrow. Make sure you take some good notes. So the introduction of the endocrine system, it is a ductless system. That means it has no ducts, not the whack whack type of ducts, but tubes. So tissues produce hormones, chemical messengers, put those chemical messengers into the blood, and they travel to another tissue where they create a response. That is an endocrine system. The exocrine system, on the other hand, is a duct system. That means they have tubes that carry the substances from where it's produced to where it is going. Now, at the bottom, we have the endocrine system here, which is putting the stuff into the blood, where the exocrine has a little tube that takes it from the tissue and takes it to its destination. Now, hormones, they are chemical messengers, and there are more than 50 known hormones. They affect specific cells because the specific cells have specific receptors on the cell surface that bind to the hormones. Because remember, shape is everything. They will cause the cells to synthesize enzymes, proteins, change rate of transcription or translation, or change the shape of some protein or enzyme. They produce things. Now, the endocrine system, like the excretory system, operates on a negative feedback loop. Now, if you need to know what negative feedback is, I'm sure I'll explain it to you now. It is a way to maintain homeostasis or the balance. It is when a stimulus creates a response that decreases the stimulus. So you have a thermostat in your house, and it's set to a certain temperature. When it hits the temperature, that is the stimulus. The response is that it turns on the HVAC, which thereby reduces the temperature. So the stimulus creates a response which reduces the stimulus, which was the increase in temperature. That is healthy. Negative feedback is always healthy. All right? So there are antagonistic hormones. That means there are hormones that work opposite each other to maintain a balance through negative feedback. That's a lot. Positive feedback, on the other hand, is when a stimulus creates a response that increases the stimulus. So, for example, a baby is crying. That is a stimulus. You try to think about why the baby is crying, so you go to try to feed the baby. But the baby's not hungry. The baby's just uncomfortable because of its wet diaper. So every time you try to feed the baby, that's the response. It increases the stimulus of the crying baby. That is unhealthy. Except in two cases, the immune system, which ironically is the next unit, and childbirth. We are going to focus on how negative feedback maintains your homeostasis or balance. So when we talk about hormones, there are three types of hormones. We have the lipid-derived hormones. They are steroids. They are lipid because they are hydrophobic. Now, they need to be carried by transport proteins. Why? Because they are hydrophobic and have problems in an aqueous environment like our blood. So proteins will protect them and carry them from place to place, like nice little proteins. Peptide hormones are amino acid chains. The simplest is antidiuretic hormone, which we talked about, and oxytocin, which we will talk about. Both of them are 9 amino acids long. That's it, not very long at all. Insulin, which we've mentioned before, is 51 amino acids long. Modified amino acids are the third group of hormones. There are only a few of these things like epinephrine and norepinephrine. So the amino acids that are used to form modified amino acids are tyrosine and tryptophan. So how do hormones work? In two different ways. We have lipids and non-lipids. So lipid-derived hormones, they bind to the cell receptor. They are able to move through the cell membrane because they are hydrophobic. They will move through the cell membrane, pass through the nucleus, bind to a protein inside the nucleus. And when they bind to the protein inside the nucleus, they are able to bind to DNA and increase transcription. So they act like a transcription factor. But the hormones have to bind first to a protein to do that. So the thyroid hormone can bind to receptors in the mitochondrion, and that will increase the production of ATP. So we have a diagram here of it going through, binding to the protein, entering here, binding to the DNA, increasing mRNA, and producing a protein. Steroids. Yay. So the second type of hormone are non-lipid derived, and those include the peptide as well as the modified amino acids. Now these cannot pass through the cell membrane at all because they are not hydrophobic, so they have to activate a secondary messenger that's inside the cell. So they can't go in through the chain link fence. They stop at the chain link fence, call to something else inside the chain link fence, and that secondary messenger will go in, cause the response. So there are two types of secondary messengers, CAMP or CAMP, which stands for cyclic adenosine monophosphate, or IP3, which is inositol phosphate, triphosphate, inositol triphosphate, IP3. It would have been perfect with IP2, but that's a whole different story. So CAMP, and what happens there? The hormone binds to a cell receptor, okay? Receptor is linked to a protein that is called G. It is a G protein linked receptor. Kind of neat how that works. When GDP is linked to the G protein, it is off. When GTP is linked to the G protein, it is on. When the hormone binds to the cell receptor, GTP will replace GDP. So it'll go from on to, it'll go from off to on. The G protein will bind to another protein, usually adenyl cyclase. This changes ATP to CAMP. Oh my gosh! CAMP will stimulate protein kinases, which will start off the enzymes. An enzyme cascade. When one enzyme affects two enzymes, affects four enzymes, so we have this huge reaction, and then the cell responds. So do we have a diagram of this? Yes, we do. So we have the hormone binding to the G protein, or the receptor, which is bound to the G protein. Right? G protein is turned on by GTP, which binds to adenyl cyclase, which cleaves ATP to CAMP, which starts the reaction. If you want, you can draw a little like concept map, flow chart, diagram, whatever you want. Hit pause. That'd be a good thing to do. IP3 is the second type of secondary messenger. Hormone binds to the G protein linked receptor, just like we talked about before. GTP displaces GTP, like we talked about before. Now, the G protein will not activate adenyl cyclase. Instead, it activates another enzyme called phospholipase C. Now, phospholipase C will cleave a special phospholipid called PIP2 into DAG, diacylglycerol, and IP3. We don't care about DAG right now. All we care is that IP3, after its form, will bind to the calcium gates on the endoplasmic reticulum. Calcium is released into the cytoplasm, and then it acts on a variety of proteins, which creates a cell response. So in this case, the G protein will activate phospholipase C, which produces IP3, which binds to the endoplasmic reticulum calcium gates, and the calcium flood into the cell, and that creates a response. Same thing here. We have the receptor binding, the hormone binds to the receptor. GTP replaces GDP. It activates right here phospholipase C, which cleaves PIP2 into IP3. IP3 will go and bind on the endoplasmic reticulum, which releases the calcium. That's a lot, I know. Good diagram, though. Nice flow chart. I think you can handle it. Hit pause, though. Hormones, we always do a little bit of comparative stuff. Hormones in invertebrates, they will maintain homeostasis, just like our hormones. They regulate water balance, just like us. They help with reproduction. Oh my gosh, like us too. They regulate growth. Guess what? Like us. And signals when to molt. We don't molt. Right? But if we did, it would signal us to molt. hormones in vertebrates, that's us, there are two main categories of hormones, not types of hormones, just categories of hormones. We have trophic hormones that affect other endocrine glands to release hormones. So they bind to the other endocrine glands, tells those other endocrine glands to release their hormones, which they do, which affect other cells and tissues. And then hormones, which affect other tissues and cells and cause some type of response. So we're going to cover some endocrine glands and the hormones they produce, the targets of the hormones, and what the cells do in response to those hormones. And you're going to get all this stuff down. I know it's crazy. So the first gland that we're going to talk about is the hypothalamus, and I cannot overestimate how important this thing is. This is such a tremendous endocrine gland. This is your body sensor. This is responsible for almost everything in your body. It is the boss of the body. It controls everything. Now they produce trophic hormones that control the anterior pituitary, and they call that the master gland. So this boss controls the master gland. It also produces two hormones which are stored in the posterior pituitary, and they have direct control over the adrenal medulla, which produces adrenaline, among something else. The hypothalamus is right in the middle of your brain, which is above the pituitary. This is the pituitary. This is the hypothalamus. Right in the middle, between the two hemispheres, the hypothalamus. In the brain, it monitors your blood for pH, temperature, hormone concentrations, solute concentrations, and it will adjust your body through negative feedback accordingly to maintain the balance. The hypothalamus controls the endocrine system as well as the nervous system. It's amazing. It will produce trophic hormones that will control the anterior pituitary. For example, it produces GnRH, which is gonadotropin releasing hormone, that travels to the anterior pituitary and tells it to release FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which is luteinizing hormone. It also produces produce hormones to inhibit the anterior pituitary, and it produces two hormones we said, ADH and oxytocin, which is stored in the posterior pituitary. Now, if you fall behind, make sure you hit pause. The pituitary gland is known as the master gland. It's about the size of a kidney bean. If you put your fingers between your eyes and in your ear where the two lines cross, that is your pituitary, which is below your hypothalamus. And I bet you'll get some of you people to do that. Stick your hand finger between your ears and in your ear and between your eyes. There are two lobes of the pituitary gland. There's the anterior and posterior. They act just like different glands that just happen to be stuck together. They have different circulatory systems. They have different nervous systems. There are two glands in one. And here's the pituitary. We have the hypothalamus above it, the pituitary below. There's like a little stalk here. And we have the anterior, which is in front, the posterior, which is behind. So the anterior pituitary produces 7 different hormones, and we're going to stop here because we're not going to have enough time. So we'll pick up the anterior pituitary in the next screencast. Hopefully this helped, and have a good night.